The stars had always called to humanity. When they finally answered that call 3 centuries ago, they found they were not alone. The galaxy was filled with life, with civilizations far older than their own, with wonders beyond imagination. They also found the Galactic Council, a gathering of the elder races who had ruled the stars for thousands of years. The Thessari were the oldest. They resembled tall, slender beings with skin like polished silver and eyes that held the wisdom of countless generations. They spoke slowly and carefully, as if every word carried the weight of history. The Morathan came next, a proud warrior race with 4 arms and scales that shifted color with their moods. They valued strength above all else and looked down upon those they considered weak. The Velith were traders and merchants, their small bodies and quick minds perfectly suited for commerce and negotiation. Together, these 3 races formed the heart of the council. Humanity arrived as newcomers, curious and eager to learn. They offered friendship. They offered cooperation. They offered their hands in peace. The council accepted these offerings, but they never truly welcomed humanity as equals. To the elder races, humans were children playing among giants. Useful, perhaps, but never worthy of real respect. Admiral Jake Porter remembered the day he first understood this truth. He was young then, just a lieutenant on a patrol ship near the Thessari border. A Vorn raiding party had ambushed a civilian transport carrying thousands of Thessari families. The Vorn were brutal creatures, pirates and slavers who preyed on the weak. They had no place on the council and wanted nothing but destruction. Jake's ship was the only one close enough to respond. He disobeyed orders to wait for backup and led his small crew into battle against 5 Vorn warships. They fought for 6 hours. They lost half their crew, but they saved every single Thessari on that transport. When Jake returned to the council station, he expected gratitude. Instead, he received a formal reprimand for acting without authorization. The Thessari counselor who addressed him never once mentioned the lives he had saved. She only spoke of protocol and proper channels. That was the moment Jake Porter understood what humanity meant to the galaxy. They were tools. Nothing more. Years passed, and Jake rose through the ranks. He became Admiral Porter, the hero of Cygnus Prime. The man who led the combined fleet against the largest Vorn invasion in galactic history. He lost good friends in that battle. Commander Tony Marsh died saving a Kellery cruiser. Lieutenant Paula Grant gave her life to protect a Morathan colony world. Captain Eddie Stone held the line for 3 days with a skeleton crew so that civilians could escape. The council celebrated the victory. They built monuments and held ceremonies. But when Jake requested that his fallen comrades be honored alongside the alien dead, the council refused. Human names were not permitted on council memorials. It was tradition, they said, tradition that could not be changed. Dr. Amy Sullivan faced similar treatment in her own field. She was a brilliant medical researcher who had dedicated her life to saving others. When a terrible plague swept through the Kellery homeworld, killing millions, it was Amy who led the effort to find a cure. She worked 20-hour days for 8 months. She watched her colleagues collapse from exhaustion. She pushed herself beyond all reasonable limits. Her team succeeded. They developed a treatment that saved the Kellery species from extinction. The Kellery council member publicly thanked the galactic medical community for their efforts. He never mentioned Amy's name. He never mentioned that humans had done most of the work. When Amy requested funding to continue her research, the council denied her application. Human projects, they explained, were a lower priority. Commander Sam Reyes spent 15 years fighting a different kind of battle. He was a diplomat, a man who believed that words could change the galaxy. He submitted petition after petition, asking the council to grant humanity a permanent seat at the high table. Each petition was rejected with polite words that meant nothing. Humanity is valued, the counselors would say. But you must understand. There are procedures. There are requirements. Perhaps in another century, you will be ready. Sam collected these rejections like wounds. He watched young humans grow old, waiting for recognition that never came. He watched idealistic volunteers become bitter cynics. He watched hope die slowly in the eyes of his people. The turning point came during a routine council session. Sam had just finished presenting evidence of humanity's contributions over the past century. He showed the battles fought, the lives saved, the technologies shared, the resources given freely. He spoke with passion and conviction. Councillor Valith of the Thessari listened with an expression of mild boredom. When Sam finished, she waved her slender hand dismissively. "Commander Reyes," she said, "your species has proven itself adequate. Adequate laborers, passable soldiers. But governance requires qualities that your kind simply does not possess. You are too young, too emotional, too unpredictable. Perhaps in time, with proper guidance, you might evolve. Until then, your place is clear. You serve. You do not lead." Sam stood in silence for a long moment. He looked around the chamber at the alien faces that showed no sympathy, no shame, no recognition of the insult they had delivered. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Back on Earth, President Lisa Dawson read Sam's report with growing anger. She was a calm woman by nature, slow to react, and careful in her judgments. But even she could not ignore what was happening to her people. The human colonies were suffering. Young men and women no longer volunteered for Council Defense Forces. Why should they risk their lives for those who despised them? Scientists stopped sharing their research freely. Doctors grew reluctant to serve on alien worlds. The spirit of cooperation that had defined humanity's galactic presence was dying. Killed by centuries of neglect and contempt. Lisa called a meeting of her senior advisors. They talked through the night, reviewing options, considering strategies. By morning, they had reached no conclusions. There were no good answers. "What do we do?" asked Secretary Danny Cole. "We can't force them to respect us." Lisa looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human soldiers were fighting and dying for worlds that would never honor their sacrifice. "We wait," she said quietly. "We wait and we watch. And when the moment comes, we will make a choice." She did not know then that the moment would come sooner than anyone expected. She did not know that blood would be the price of clarity. But she knew, deep in her heart, that something had to change. The old ways were ending. The question was, what would replace them? Kepler-7 was a mining station on the edge of Morathan space. It floated in the darkness between stars, a small collection of metal and light, where humans and aliens worked side by side extracting rare minerals from passing asteroids. It was not an important place. The Council barely knew it existed. But it would become the most important place in galactic history. The trouble started with a simple trade dispute. A Morathan merchant accused a human worker named Pete Larson of stealing cargo. Pete denied the accusation. He had witnesses who supported his story. The evidence was clear. But the Morathan security forces did not care about evidence. They cared about pride. The Morathan were a proud race. To them, the word of a Morathan was worth more than 100 human witnesses. They demanded that Pete confess to a crime he did not commit. When he refused, they decided to make an example of him. What happened next was captured on security cameras throughout the station. The footage would later spread across every human colony, burning itself into the collective memory of the species. Morathan guards dragged Pete from his quarters in the middle of the night. Other human workers tried to intervene, calling for calm, trying to negotiate. The guards responded with violence. They fired into the crowd without warning. When the shooting stopped, 17 humans lay dead on the cold metal floor. Among them were 3 children who had been sleeping in their parents' arms. The youngest was 4 years old. Her name was Lily Warren, and she had been dreaming of the stars when she died. The Morathan guards stepped over the bodies without a second glance. They took Pete Larson to their ship and left the station. They never faced any consequences for what they had done. Ambassador Ben Carter was the first council representative to arrive at Kepler-7. He was a veteran diplomat with 30 years of experience, a man who had seen cruelty and injustice in many forms. But nothing had prepared him for what he found. The survivors were still in shock. They sat among the bloodstains, holding each other, unable to speak. A woman named Grace Powell clutched a small shoe that had belonged to her daughter. She stared at Ben with empty eyes and said nothing. Ben documented everything. He recorded testimonies, gathered evidence, compiled a case that was absolutely airtight. He presented this case to the Galactic Council with all the force and passion he could summon. High Counselor Thesson listened without expression. When Ben finished, there was a long silence. Then, Thesson spoke in her calm, measured voice. "This is regrettable," she said. "However, the incident occurred in Morathan space. It is an internal Morathan affair. The Council has no jurisdiction." Ben stared at her in disbelief. 17 of my people are dead. 3 of them were children. We are aware of the casualties. Nevertheless, the matter does not fall within Council authority. The Morathan government has assured us that they will investigate the incident through their own channels. Their own channels? Ben's voice rose despite his training. Their guards committed murder. There are recordings. There is proof. In this event, there are recordings. Their own channels. Counselor Morath of the Morathan shifted in his seat. His scales darkened with annoyance. You forget your place, human. You are guests in this galaxy. You would do well to remember that your presence here is a privilege, not a right. Ben felt something break inside him. It was not anger, exactly. It was something colder and more final. It was the death of hope. I understand perfectly, he said quietly. Then he transmitted the security footage to every human communication network in the galaxy. Within hours, billions of humans watched the massacre at Kepler 7. They saw the guards fire into the crowd. They saw the bodies fall. They saw little Lily Warren take her last breath in her father's arms. They saw the Morathans step over the dead as if they were garbage. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted on every human colony. Workers walked off their jobs at council facilities. Soldiers refused to report for duty. The message was clear and unified. Enough. No more. President Lisa Dawson knew she had to act. She spent 3 days in consultation with her advisors, with military commanders, with colonial governors. She listened to every opinion, considered every option. In the end, the choice was simple. She traveled to the council chamber in person. It was the first time a human head of state had appeared before the full council. The alien counselors watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Lisa stood at the speaker's platform, a small figure surrounded by the towering monuments of alien power. She did not seem intimidated. Her voice was steady when she spoke. 3 centuries ago, humanity came to the stars with open hands. We asked for nothing but friendship. We offered everything we had. Our technology, our medicine, our soldiers, our lives. She paused, letting the words settle. We fought your wars. We bled on worlds that were not our own. We mourned your dead as if they were our brothers and sisters. When plague threatened the Kellery, we worked until we collapsed to save them. When the Vorn attacked, we died in the thousands to protect you. Her voice hardened. And in return, you gave us nothing but contempt. You called us children. You called us servants. You murdered our people and called it an internal affair. The council chamber was absolutely silent. Even Thessan seemed unable to respond. We asked for respect, Lisa continued. You denied us. We asked for justice. You denied us. We asked for a place at your table. You denied us. Again and again. For 300 years. You denied us. She took a deep breath. We will not ask again. Effective immediately. All human personnel are being recalled from council space. All human technology is being removed. All human aid is being terminated. You wanted a galaxy without human influence. You wanted us to know our place. Lisa looked directly at High Counselor Thessan. Now you will have exactly what you wished for. And you will learn what that truly means. She turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid falling shut. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Counselor Morath laughed. a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "Let them go," he said. "We do not need them. We never did." High Counselor Thesson said nothing. But somewhere in her ancient eyes, there was the faintest flicker of doubt. The withdrawal began the next morning. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds and stations, humans started packing their belongings. They moved with quiet efficiency, without anger or drama. They simply gathered what was theirs and prepared to leave. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the evacuation fleet from Thesari space. His ships formed a long convoy stretching across the stars, carrying over 2 million human civilians and military personnel back to Earth-controlled territories. Ryan had served the Council for 23 years. He had believed in the mission, believed that patience and service would eventually earn respect. Now he understood how foolish that belief had been. His second officer, Lieutenant Carol Hayes, stood beside him on the bridge as they made the final jump away from Thesari Prime. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Ryan watched the Thesari homeworld disappear from his view screen. It was a beautiful planet, covered in silver forests and crystal seas. He had spent some of the best years of his life defending it. "No," he said, "not anymore." On the space stations that humans had helped build and maintain, Chief Engineer Kate Morrison supervised the removal of critical technology. The power cores were human designs, compact and efficient, capable of running for decades without major repairs. The Thesari and Velith had nothing comparable. Their own systems were larger, less reliable, and required constant attention. Kate's team worked around the clock, carefully disconnecting each core and loading it onto transport ships. The station administrators watched with growing alarm. "You cannot take those," protested a Velith official named Coordinator Thresh. "The stations will not function without them." Kate looked at him with tired eyes. "These cores were designed and built by human engineers. They belong to us. Your people never wanted to learn how they worked. You said it was beneath you. But we need them. The backup systems are not adequate. Then I suggest you learn quickly." Kate turned back to her work. "You have about 3 days of reserve power. After that, you're on your own." The medical facilities were hardest to leave. Dr. Chris Yang had spent 15 years on the Kelari homeworld, studying their unique biology, developing treatments for diseases that had plagued them for generations. His research had saved millions of lives. His database contained the only complete record of Kelari genetics in existence. When the recall order came, Chris packed everything, every file, every sample, every piece of equipment that humans had brought. The Kelari health minister begged him to stay, promising honors and rewards that had never been offered before. "We value your work," the minister said desperately. "We value you." Chris shook his head sadly. "You value what I can do for you. There is a difference. I learned that distinction the hard way." He left behind empty laboratories and frightened doctors who suddenly realized how much they had depended on human expertise. Nurse Hannah Price was among the last medical staff to depart from the Council's central medical hub. She had worked there for 20 years, treating patients of every species without discrimination. She had delivered Thesari babies and held the hands of dying Morathan warriors. She had given everything she had to give. On her final day, she walked through the corridors one last time. Thesari doctors watched her pass with expressions she could not read. Were they grateful? Angry? Ashamed? She could not tell. At the exit, she paused and looked back. "Good luck," she said softly. She meant it sincerely. Despite everything, she did not wish them harm. But she also knew that luck would not be enough. The medical hub would struggle without human staff, human equipment, human knowledge. They had never bothered to learn what they would need to know. The military withdrawal was the most dramatic. Human soldiers had formed the backbone of Council defense forces for centuries. They were the ones who held the dangerous posts, who volunteered for suicide missions, who died in the darkness so that others might live in light. General Marcus Webb coordinated the pullback from the frontier. His troops had been fighting a low-intensity war against Vorn raiders for years, keeping the enemy at bay through skill and sacrifice. When the order came to withdraw, he obeyed without hesitation. His Thesari counterpart, Commander Valeth, was less composed. "You cannot leave us exposed," Valeth protested. "The Vorn will attack the moment they sense weakness." Marcus looked at him with cold eyes. "Then perhaps you should have treated my soldiers with more respect when you had the chance. This is not fair. We had nothing to do with Kepler-7. No. You just refused to condemn it. You just called it an internal affair. You just told us to know our place." Marcus gathered his gear. "Well, now we know our place. It is not here." The humans established a border. But it was not a border of weapons or warships. It was a border of silence. They simply stopped answering calls. When Thessari diplomats requested meetings, there was no response. When Morathan merchants sought trade agreements, there was no response. When Kelari scientists asked for research collaborations, there was no response. The silence was absolute and terrifying. On the human side of the border, life continued. Cities grew. Families thrived. Scientists made new discoveries. Artists created new works. The human colonies had always been self-sufficient. They had shared their abundance with the galaxy out of generosity, not necessity. Now that generosity was withdrawn. President Lisa Dawson addressed her people 1 month after the departure. She stood in the Great Hall on Earth, surrounded by representatives from every human colony. "We did not want this," she said. "We wanted peace. We wanted partnership. We wanted to be part of something greater than ourselves. But partnership requires mutual respect. It requires recognizing the worth of others. The Council never offered us that recognition. They saw us as tools to be used and discarded." She looked out at the faces of her people. "We are not tools. We are human beings. We have value beyond our usefulness. We deserve to be treated with dignity. If the galaxy cannot understand that, then the galaxy will learn what it means to live without us." The applause that followed was long and loud. But beneath the celebration, there was also sadness. They had not wanted to leave. They had been pushed out by centuries of contempt. Now the galaxy would face the consequences of that contempt. And humanity would watch from a distance, waiting to see what would happen next. The collapse began slowly, like a crack spreading through ice. At first, the Council pretended nothing was wrong. Councillor Morath continued to speak of human weakness and Morathan strength. High Councillor Thesson assured everyone that temporary adjustments would be made. The Veleth merchants calculated their losses and assumed they would find new partners. They were all wrong. The first crisis came within 3 months. The Vorn Collective had been watching the human withdrawal with hungry eyes. They were patient predators who understood weakness better than anyone. When they saw the frontier defenses crumble, they struck. The attack on the Thessari border colony of Verath Prime was devastating. Without human tactical coordination, the defense fleet fell into chaos. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly could not communicate effectively. Commanders gave contradictory orders. Units retreated when they should have advanced when they should have held position. The Vorn tore through them like wolves through sheep. Verath Prime fell in 6 days. 8 million Thessari civilians were captured and taken to Vorn slave camps. The Council sent urgent requests for help to Earth. The requests went unanswered. Admiral Jake Porter, now retired from active service, watched the news reports from his home on Earth. He felt no satisfaction in the Thessari defeat. He remembered too many good people who had died fighting alongside them. But he also remembered how his fallen friends had been denied even the simple honor of having their names remembered. They made their choice, he said quietly to himself. Now they live with it. The military losses were only the beginning. On 17 space stations throughout Council territory, the human-designed power cores began to fail. Kate Morrison's warning had been accurate. The backup systems could not handle the load. Stations that had operated smoothly for decades now struggled with constant blackouts, failing life support, and dangerous radiation leaks. Coordinator Thresh, the Veleth official, who had demanded that Kate leave the power cores behind, died when his station's atmospheric recyclers failed. He was far from the only casualty. Hundreds of people perished in accidents that would never have happened with proper equipment. The Kalari plague returned 6 months after the human departure. It was a mutated strain, different enough from the original that the old treatments no longer worked. Dr. Chris Yang had anticipated this possibility. His research files contained detailed protocols for developing new vaccines. But those files were now on Earth, and the Kellari had no access to them. The Kellari health minister sent desperate messages to Ambassador Matt Ellis, the senior human diplomat responsible for monitoring events in Council space. Matt read the messages with a heavy heart. He had Kellari friends. He knew good people who would die if help did not come. But his orders were clear. No assistance would be provided without a formal apology and recognition of humanity's equal status. The Council had not yet offered either. "I am sorry," Matt replied to the health minister. "My hands are tied. If there is anything I can do personally, I will. But official aid requires official change." The health minister understood. He did not blame Matt. He blamed his own government, his own council, his own people who had taken human help for granted for so long. The plague spread, hospitals filled. Funeral pyres burned day and night on the Kellari homeworld. Trade collapsed next. The routes that humans had protected for centuries became hunting grounds for pirates. The Veleth had grown wealthy by moving goods safely across the galaxy. Without that safety, their entire economy fell apart. Ships were captured. Cargo was stolen. Crews were killed or sold into slavery. Insurance costs rose to impossible levels. Companies that had operated for generations declared bankruptcy overnight. The Veleth delegation demanded that the Council provide military escorts for merchant vessels. But the military was stretched thin, fighting Vorn on the frontier, dealing with rebellions in the outer colonies, trying to maintain order as everything fell apart. High Counselor Thesson convened an emergency session of the Council. The chamber that had once been filled with confidence and pride was now thick with fear and desperation. "We must contact the humans," urged the new Kellari counselor, a young female named Counselor Sereth, who had risen to power after her predecessor died of plague. "We must apologize. We must beg them to return." "Beg?" Counselor Morath's scales flushed red with anger. "The Morathan do not beg, especially not to lesser species." "Lesser species?" Sereth turned on him with fury in her eyes. "Those lesser species saved my people twice. Those lesser species protected your borders for 300 years. Those lesser species are the only reason any of us are still alive. They abandoned us. They proved their cowardice. They left because we treated them like dirt. They left because your guards murdered their children, and we called it an internal affair." Sereth pointed a trembling finger at Morath. "They left because of you." The chamber erupted in argument. Old alliances shattered. Accusations flew. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council seemed ready to tear itself apart. High Counselor Thesson raised her hand for silence. It took several minutes for order to be restored. "This fighting serves no purpose," she said wearily. Her voice had lost its usual calm authority. She sounded old and tired. "We are facing destruction. If we cannot unite, we will fall." "Then what do you suggest?" asked a Veleth representative. Thesson was silent for a long moment. Then, she spoke words that had never been spoken in that chamber before. "We were wrong. We were wrong about the humans. We used them. We dismissed them. We insulted them at every turn. And now, we are paying the price." She looked around at her fellow counselors. "We must send them an apology, a real apology. We must admit our mistakes and ask for forgiveness. It is the only way." Counselor Morath stormed out of the chamber, refusing to participate in what he called humiliation. But the other counselors remained. One by one, they voted to approve the apology. The message was sent that evening. It was the longest and most humble communication the Council had ever produced. It acknowledged every injustice, every slight, every death that had gone unavenged. It admitted fault without reservation. It asked, quite simply, for another chance. Then they waited for a response. The Council's apology arrived at Earth on a quiet Tuesday morning. It traveled across the vast emptiness of space, carrying words that had taken 300 years to speak. President Lisa Dawson received the transmission in her private office, surrounded by her most trusted advisors. She read it aloud. The document was long and detailed. It listed specific incidents of mistreatment. It named the officials responsible for the worst injustices. It acknowledged that humanity had been exploited, disrespected, and denied basic dignity. It promised that things would be different. It begged for forgiveness. When Lisa finished reading, there was silence in the room. Secretary Danny Cole wiped his eyes. He had lost a nephew at Kepler 7. Admiral Jake Porter sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. He had buried too many friends to count. "Well," said Lisa softly. "They finally said it. 3 centuries too late," Jake replied. Lisa set down the document. She walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Earth had never been more beautiful. The human colonies had never been more prosperous. In the year since the withdrawal, humanity had flourished without the burden of serving ungrateful masters. "What do we do?" Danny asked. Lisa did not answer immediately. She thought about the 17 names carved into the memorial at Kepler 7. She thought about Lily Warren, 4 years old, who had never seen her 5th birthday. She thought about all the soldiers who had died on alien worlds. Their sacrifices, unmarked and unmourned. "We do nothing," she said finally. Danny stared at her. "Nothing? Nothing." Lisa turned back to face her advisors. "They do not want our forgiveness. They want our usefulness. There is a difference." 18 SIGs. "But people are dying out there," Danny protested. "Millions of people. The plague, the Vorn attacks, the station failures. We could save them." "We could," Lisa agreed. "We saved them before. We saved them again and again, for 300 years. And every time, they forgot. Every time, they went back to treating us like servants." She sat down heavily in her chair. "I am not a cruel woman, Danny. I do not want anyone to suffer. But I also cannot condemn my own people to another 3 centuries of exploitation. If we go back now, nothing will change. They will be grateful for a year, maybe 2, then the old patterns will return. They will take us for granted again. They will forget again." Jake nodded slowly. "She is right. I have seen it happen too many times. They learn nothing because there are no consequences. They apologize when they are scared, then forget their apologies when the fear passes. So we let them suffer, we let them learn," Lisa corrected. "We let them understand, truly understand, what they lost. Maybe then, when we return, they will remember. And if they do not survive the lesson," Lisa closed her eyes, "then at least our children will not have to learn what we learned. They will not have to endure what we endured." The formal response to the council was brief. It acknowledged receipt of the apology. It offered no promises. It provided no timeline for reconciliation. It simply stated that humanity would continue to observe developments in council space with interest. On the border station, Lieutenant Megan Torres worked the night shift. She monitored the communication channels that connected human space to the rest of the galaxy. Most nights, the channels were quiet, but tonight, they were filled with voices. She heard Thesari distress calls as another Vorn attack overwhelmed their defenses. A colony called Valath Minor was burning. Families were fleeing to shelters that would not protect them. Children were crying for parents who would never come. She heard Kellari doctors pleading for medical supplies. The plague had spread to 3 more cities. Hospitals had run out of basic treatments. People were dying in the hallways because there were no more beds. She heard Velith traders screaming as pirates tore their convoy apart. A ship called the Golden Promise was being boarded. The crew knew they would be killed or enslaved. Their final transmissions were prayers and goodbyes. Megan's hand hovered over the transmit button. Every instinct she had told her to respond. She was a human being. Humans helped others. That was who they were. That was what they did. But behind her, on the wall of the station, was a memorial. 17 names were carved into the metal. At the bottom was the name of Lily Warren, age 4. Megan remembered visiting Kepler 7 after the massacre. She remembered the bloodstains that no one had cleaned up. She remembered the small shoe that Grace Powell had refused to let go of. She withdrew her hand. The silence continued. In the council chamber, High Counselor Thesson received reports of mounting disasters. The Vorn had taken 20 more systems. The plague had killed 3 million Kellari. The trade routes were completely paralyzed. Riots were breaking out on a dozen worlds. "They are not coming back," she said quietly. Counselor Sereth stood beside her, looking older than her years. "No, they are not. I thought the apology would be enough. I thought they would forgive us." "Would you forgive us? If our positions were reversed?" Thesson considered the question carefully. She thought about the centuries of contempt. She thought about Kepler-7. She thought about all the small cruelties that had accumulated into something monstrous. "No," she admitted. "I would not." Sereth nodded. "Then we have our answer." Outside the chamber windows, the stars burned cold and distant. They were the same stars they had always been. But now they seemed hostile, indifferent to the suffering below. The galaxy that the Council had ruled for thousands of years was falling apart, and there was no one left to save them. Thessan thought about humanity. She thought about their strange combination of strength and kindness, their willingness to die for others, their stubborn belief that everyone deserved compassion. She had never understood them. She had dismissed them as emotional, naive, weak. Now she realized that their compassion had been their greatest gift. They had offered it freely, asking nothing in return except basic respect. The Council had refused even that simple request. And now, across the vast emptiness between stars, humanity watched in silence. They felt no joy in the suffering of their former allies. They took no satisfaction in the reckoning that was unfolding, but they also felt no obligation to help those who had never valued them. The galaxy had taught humanity a lesson about their own worth. Now the galaxy was learning a lesson too. It was learning what it meant to face the darkness alone, and somewhere on Earth, in a memorial garden beside the sea, flowers bloomed over the graves of those who had given everything. They had died for a galaxy that did not love them, but they were remembered by those who did. That was enough. It would have to be. The stars continued to burn. The silence continued to speak. And humanity continued to wait, watching from the other side of a border that was measured not in distance, but in pain.